Because of why I search the deep through endless nights, no time to sleep. The call inside I can't deny. I'll find the light because of why.
For more than 40 years, the UK was a central player in the European Union. And then, in 2016, everything changed. The country voted to leave. This was Brexit. The big question is why? What really happened here? Let's break it down.
Okay, so the final result on June 23, 2016 was an absolute nail-biter. As you can see here, 51.9% voted to leave and 48.1% voted to remain. That razor-thin margin sent shockwaves not just through Europe, but around the whole world, and it revealed a country that was really deeply divided. So you have to ask, how does a relationship that's lasted 4 decades just end like this? Well, the thing is, it wasn't about one single issue. It was more like a perfect storm of different factors. These deep-rooted ideas about national sovereignty, anxieties about immigration, and 2 totally different visions for the country's economic future. To really get to the why, we first have to understand the who, because the referendum didn't just split the country down the middle politically. It exposed these huge social divides that turned out to be absolutely crucial to the final result. And this is fascinating. A really clear divide emerged based on education. If you are a graduate, you are way more likely to vote Remain. But for voters who didn't have formal qualifications, support for Leave shot past 60%. I mean, this wasn't just a small trend. Your education level became one of the best ways to predict how you were going to vote. And it wasn't just education. Age was another massive factor. Younger generations, by and large, voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU. Meanwhile, older generations were much more likely to vote to leave. It just showed this fundamental difference in worldview and life experience between the generations. So with all that in mind, what was the single biggest reason people gave for voting leave? It was an idea that was captured in one simple but incredibly powerful slogan: take back control. And this was all about sovereignty. This quote right here gets straight to the point. It comes from a massive poll of over 12,000 voters on the day of the referendum. For almost half of all Leave voters, this was it. This was their number one motivation. It was a message about self-rule that just hit home for millions of people. And at the heart of this is a concept called parliamentary sovereignty. It's a cornerstone of the British Constitution. The basic idea is that the UK Parliament is the top dog, the supreme legal authority. So for a lot of people, the idea that EU law could override UK law felt like a direct challenge to that core principle. You know, this feeling of losing control didn't just pop up out of nowhere in 2016. It had been building for decades. If you look back, you can kind of see a pattern. The UK joins in 73 without a referendum. Later on, huge treaties like Maastricht and Lisbon, which gave more and more power to the EU, were signed off by politicians, not by a public vote. So this feeling grew that big decisions were being made without the people's say. And this brings us to the 2 completely different ways of looking at EU membership. Was the UK giving away its sovereignty, basically just becoming a rule taker from Brussels? Or was it actually sharing its sovereignty to get more influence over a massive economic bloc, essentially making itself more powerful on the world stage? Okay, so beyond all the laws and the politics, the Brexit debate was also deeply, deeply tied to questions of national identity, and in particular, the impact of immigration. One of the EU's core principles is freedom of movement, which lets citizens live and work in any member country. This became a central and very emotional issue, and it was really amplified by the European migrant crisis in 2015, which was all over the news in the lead-up to the vote. For a lot of people, the whole debate really boiled down to this one thing. I mean, a full third of Leave voters said that controlling immigration was their main reason for voting out. The Leave campaign was really effective at framing EU membership as a total loss of control over the country's own borders. And of course, we have to talk about the money. The economy was a huge part of the conversation. Both sides made some really bold and often totally conflicting claims about what leaving or staying would mean for the UK's wallet. This was probably the most famous and definitely the most controversial economic claim of the whole campaign. You couldn't miss it. It was plastered on the side of a big red bus that toured the entire country. But that £350 million figure was hugely disputed. It was the gross number, what the UK sends before you factor in the UK's rebate, and other money the EU actually spends in the UK. The country's own official statistics watchdog even called the number misleading. The actual net payment was closer to this, £150 million a week. Now, that's still a ton of money, but it's less than half the number on the bus. So you had these two completely different economic futures being presented to the country. The Leave side promised this liberated global Britain, free from EU red tape and able to strike its own trade deals. The Remain side, on the other hand, warned of a massive economic shock and the huge risks of walking away from our biggest trading partner. And you can see one of the immediate effects right here. The uncertainty after the vote had a real impact. For years leading up to 2016, you see that business investment was climbing steadily. But right after the referendum, it just flatlined. It stagnated. That created a pretty big gap between what was happening and what was expected to happen. We'd love to hear your take on the economic arguments in the comments below. So as you can see, this was never a simple choice. The vote to leave wasn't driven by any single issue, but by a really powerful combination of factors that, when they all came together, just managed to tilt the result. It was really the convergence of these four powerful forces. You had the desire for sovereignty, concerns over identity and immigration, and a particular hope for the economy. Each one resonated with millions of voters for different reasons, and their combined weight was just enough to get the Leave campaign over the finish line. Now, the debate over the long-term impact of Brexit is far from over. But the UK's independent budget watchdog has put out a forecast, and it estimates that in the long run, leaving the EU will reduce the UK's productivity by about 4%, compared to where it would have been if the country had stayed in. Ultimately, the story of Brexit is about so much more than just the UK. It's really a powerful local example of a much bigger global story, how nations everywhere are wrestling with globalization, trade, and national identity. It really makes you ask, how do you balance being part of a global economy with having a sense of national control? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for joining this breakdown, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more explainers.